let's say, type making process gets stretched out. The errors can be made later. If you're making big bits of metal that you need to cast and smelt and transport and so on, you need to make sure that all your errors are at the earliest possible point of the process. If you're doing things in a digital environment, maybe errors further down are much easier and cheaper to correct. So there's an interesting dimension there. How does this change the decision-making process for type? And something that we've talked quite a lot about, and I'm going to shut up after this. Sorry, I'm at the age where I have to take on and on glasses all the time. This doesn't work. Is how do you define shapes? Some of the stuff that Ferdinand showed had things that we would recognize as outlines, or there were patterns. There were physical shapes that you could see a border around. And there were things that were drawn by a hand as strokes. And there were things that imitated that, but were actually outlines which didn't have any physical equivalent. Whereas there are other cases where you might be sculpting something out of 3D, so revealing a shape out of negative space, or building something from the inside out by writing something or drawing something with a tool that leaves things at the center of a stroke and then spread out. So the nature of how capturing these shapes has changed in digital environments, or hasn't changed enough in digital environments, is something that I think exercised us quite a lot. So this is where we are. We started putting these things together, partly because we thought cool ideas have been around for quite some time. It's good to get them out. They are relevant to what we're talking about now, especially issues that have to do with collaboration, how people explain what they do are important. And we wanted to bring some of these issues to the front. So that's my introduction to the panel. I am not going to say anything about your bios. I think that's wrong. Yeah? You have to trust us, Ferdinand and me, to have selected people whose opinions are worth listening to. So just assume that these people represent trustworthy perspectives on the type process, and just take it from there. Yeah? Okay, good. I'm done. Who wants to go first? You want to start off with the issue of collaboration we're talking about and how this has changed?
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah. You're wired up. Okay, go.
Yeah, it's very difficult because it's just from my personal perspective is, I mean, what I want to say, it's not my bio, but I heavily got influenced by Fred's book Counterpunch. And I'm trained in the old skills, and I learned by hand. So I'm a trained drawer, painter, and calligrapher in a way in the art school. And then I was always very, very interested in the technical part. And I really have to force myself to catch up. I mean, I am interested, but I'm absolutely aware that it doesn't help that I have a certain name now and I know certain things. I think this is worth nothing, because right now I think everything is changing rapidly in a way. And on the other hand, it stays. So from my point of view, it's the way of actually create type or draw type or approach a project from the design perspective. Okay, you have to work design-orientated or solution-orientated, but at the end, how I design is I'm working with the proportions, I'm working from the counter, I'm working with the space in between. And for me, maybe I'm totally wrong, but right now it has nothing to do with the actual application or with the actual, with the development or the programming. And I think it's very interesting now because we've got all these great new options coming up, and this is where I just think, oh my God, this is where I intellectually get lost in space because of all these access and possibilities. But this is also where I see the chance and where I just think maybe the whole variable fonts idea is not just limited to typography and type design. I think there's much more. It might be in product design and so on. And now the collaboration, this is where I just think this is the new time. I was spoiled because I caught the time when we could be the narcissistic designers who started with a sketch, and then we made our fonts, and then we released them, and we could do everything on our own. And we could take all the credits for this. And now it's different, I think. But I think this is also the great chance, and this is why I tomorrow will give a presentation with my student, with Maciej, because I think it's time to really hand it over to the next generation, but we need to guide the next generation with what we learned and what is fixed, I think, and we have to learn to really trust each other and benefit from each other. So for me, it's not a question of design, it's not a question of the programming or whatever, it's a question of attitude. And this is what you said, it's really, I would like to see more collaboration already here on this conference. So, because I noticed that some solutions were in the outline and there were people were looking in the coding and vice versa. So this is just my statement.
To many things I agree. It's indeed a time of collaboration. I can be super narcissistic if I want to be.
Oh, me too.
I mean, yeah. But I don't get any friendlier from that. But no, you're right. We witnessed an area over a time span where we pretty much did our own thing, and we could hit a button, and there was an end-user font which would function. Those times are over, those days. We have to collaborate with, as designers, with all kinds of technicians, coders. And it's indeed not always that easy to make that switch, though I have a tradition in working with engineers already from my OCA days, OCA days. But I indeed think that this world of type, it's a bit more than just design. It's also automatization. It's also control by automatization. It's also about comfort, very important. Work that is not interesting per se always, like kerning, for instance, can be made more easier to do, more comfortable. So you don't start kerning with, oh my God, next 2 weeks I have to do. So that's all possible. So I think that the area of type design itself has maybe disciplines, or can be open to disciplines near to it, where other people work, and where, kind of overlap with technology and the people who make actually these shapes does exist. And then for the rest, okay, all this world with websites and virtual reality, that's indeed, you cannot do everything alone anymore, that's for sure.
But at the same time, I think you kind of, some people do like, make the sketches, design a typeface, produce it, export it, sell it, make their website. And also if you look from, as we were discussing, from a sort of historical point of view, I think it's quite interesting to see if you see like the hand punch cutting, where quite often the designer and the person producing the typeface was the same person. And then moving to the sort of hot metal, these tasks got completely separate. You literally couldn't. I don't think there's one example of someone who actually could do the whole process. And then gradually with digital, at least that's the way I see it, things got reunited again, and you could be one single person who would do all of these sort of tasks from design to all the way to production and distribution and this kind of thing. So it's true that obviously, like in some certain projects nowadays, it would be difficult to do everything yourself, but it's still fairly accessible in some ways compared to.
But is it worth it?
It depends. Like some people like to control everything, or some people like to, I don't know.
Yeah, but also the general level of quality and skill has gone up. So if you want to be really good, you have to do a lot of editing, I think, and keep things under control. And that means that you cannot just answer every email yourself, for instance. I mean, you work yourself, work in a company environment. You are protected from all kinds of questions or customers who really don't understand what they just bought, and you have to answer them.
Yeah.
If you have to do that today, all by yourself, and Twitter around, and Facebook here, and Instagram up and down, I mean, you cannot sleep anymore.
I agree.
But
there are people maybe who can do it, but I'm not one of them.
This is actually not what I meant. I mean, then get a secretary. But no, I think it's much more that I just don't know what is going to happen, and I just don't know the possibilities, and because I can't know, and because no one knows, and I think the end users will be a young generation that grew up without a pencil. They grew up in virtual space anyways with their ego shooters, or not even ego shooters. So it's just they live in a completely different digital environment, and these are going to be the clients. This is going to be what is needed, and this is something I just don't know. And they don't know typography, and they don't know type, and they don't know aspects that are important. And this is where I just think, I don't know where this is all going, but it's...
Okay, let's see if Yves has the answer to that.
Tell me.
Is this working? Is this working? Yeah, I don't have any answers. No, I think the concept of collaboration brings up another interesting thing, is that authorship. There was a discussion after TYPO where a panel with Veronica and Jose and so on was about how you credit the people that work on a typeface, because we've come in such a highly technical environment that you may argue that the people drawing the characters only do part of the work, and the engineers who actually make the font work, and also all the OpenType features and so on, that they're an integral part of the creation process. How do you deal with relinquishing part of your authorship? How do you regard this collaboration-wise? Do you share credit or not? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah. It's very simple. You can share credit. Authorship you cannot share. You can credit people assisting you, and that what they did is indeed can be of vital importance, but an authorship you cannot share. There's one designer, there's one writer of the book, and this designer, he or she started with making these shapes, and they weren't there before, and from these shapes all the rest evolved. So I think authorship cannot be, in principle, cannot be divided unless the group says we are going to design the very basics of this design together, and we upfront share authorship. But indeed, in terms of developing a sketch or a design, because a design is not a product, and developing that design into an actual product, you can be assisted by a lot of different people, and those people do sometimes work which is not just labor. Yeah? So then you might credit them really for helping or creating this product. Yeah.
I don't agree on this.
Good.
No, I think the whole development, why should the development only be in technology? The development also needs to be in law. And I think we do need new copyright law. We saw it with Hollywood and all the directors and the credits and the writers, the copywriters not even mentioned and so on. So they did changes there. And I think if someone shows me how to do an incredible variable font idea that might end up for prothesis or I don't know what now, it's not what I created because someone gave me the idea and I collaborated with my design. And right now I agree, we do have a certain law that says, okay, you can credit, but authorship can't be divided. But I think this is also, I think we are talking about something really, really big, and I don't want to see this only in type design and typography. I think this whole development of open source, and yeah, this is, I don't believe in open source, but it is there, so there is a lot that needs to be discussed to protect people.
Malou, you want to say something?
No, I think overall, I would say I agree with Fred.
Both.
And just I think you can be inspired by many different things, but overall, like the division of authorship and credits is quite valid, I think, in my view.
Can I ask, are there any people who pay their rent from hinting in the audience? 1, 2 people. Would you not argue that there are design decisions in what you're doing? I'm trying to be really careful here. But I've had discussions with people who do hinting, and they would argue that because they intervene with the final state of the typeface, what the user sees, that bit is the design, not the bits earlier, and therefore they make design decisions. Now I'm just putting this out there.
I can actually comment on that in a way that I did a project as a designer with Christian Cruz, and then we had a person doing the hinting, and then we allowed him to make design decisions for things that would optimize the font for Spring. So he was part of the team, and he did make decisions.
So is this, in a sense, a problem right now in typeface design, that especially as the modes of making stuff change, we might not have a very clear idea of what are the limits of design decisions for each of the people collaborating? And I mean, you work in a team, yeah?
Yeah, I agree that, I think I do agree that the hinting is part of the design, and that in an ideal world, I would probably do the hinting myself, which I'm also quite happy not to do actually, but...
no,
yeah,
what if I say at the M of 24, my counter is 5 wide by the P? As a designer, I say that to the hinter. So then I've solved my problem.
Okay, so then it's a matter of the granularity of the instructions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to apologize. Yesterday, when I was giving my talk, I was slightly alarmed by the non-technical nature of all the talks before me, so I actually didn't go through all the parts about hinting in my slides. I actually want to make a comment about hinting. Actually, the entire legibility of text actually is quite subjective. So there are judgments involved of what is considered legible. For example, you could be, if you don't read Chinese, and you could be hinting something that is technologically correct, but then I wouldn't be able to read it from a native reader's point of view. So there are judgment involved, and when there is judgment and aesthetic view involved, then that is actually part of a design process, although it's highly technical in nature. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So this might also relate with what kind of information do you give someone like me who can't read Chinese when I go and try to hint your Chinese typeface? And is the instructions you want to give me that say, do this? Now, something that we also talked about is the documentation that accompanies the design process. And these examples that Ferdinand showed produced a lot of paper. Mm-hmm. They produced notes and correspondence and manuals and a little missive from the other, partly because communication was slow, so people had to put things in envelopes and send them, but also because they were often in an academic environment, so keeping record of what they did was part of their way of thinking. Whereas what we were discussing earlier today was the problem that a lot of the applications that people use today to design, even if they're in a collaborative environment, they're essentially aimed at just their user, their immediate user. And that applies across all type design applications. And the idea of capturing documentation is not really an integral part of these applications. So there's a deficit. You make something that's a bit of software, but it doesn't have any knowledge that accompanies it that can help people interpret it or understand your intentions. So how do you keep notes of your intentions? Do you keep sketches, or do you write words down?
Yeah, I do. I may do both. I have my notebooks to go year by year. I do, yeah. And I also, but the real difficult things are only described often described in words. But the whole process of step-by-step designing and documenting that's hardly possible, because that would be a job on itself, and the archive would be probably immense. If you have to, what do you expect from me if I have to prove to you that I did design actually a certain typeface? I mean, for many type designers today, that would be difficult, because there is no matter, there's no material.
Yeah, for me it's more, I think, a sort of abstract frame of mind. As you go along, just I think it's more intuitive, and then which is also why if you leave a typeface that's in the work for a while and then you go back to it, usually it will take quite a while before you get in the right frame of mind again to be able to keep on developing the character set. I don't know if that answers the...
Are there any people with a natural sciences background in the audience who are thinking, if I can't describe it, it doesn't exist? No?
Just out of curiosity, would you be inclined to welcome software, part of the design software that also somehow keeps a log? Because these days the data storage is so easy that you may have some kind of, while you are designing, the design software also keeps track of certain decisive steps, and that you can later go back and see what you did. Would that be something that you would welcome in your design process?
In principle, it depends on everybody's own methods of working, but you just upgrade your model file or master file, and then you indeed can see, oh yeah, that's how it looked at 3 months ago. But that's a discipline you have to develop yourself, and it's, it creates a lot of data and files. And to order those, everything, that's also requires also effort, discipline, all these virtues that our parents want us to have, and which we never really managed to develop, really. So anything that could automate that, anything that could help in that would be, in principle, welcome, if you're interested in it. Yeah.
I'm a control freak, and, and I did what your parents tried to teach.
you managed to do that.
I'm the Prussian here. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't document in a way, because, I mean, first I have a photographic memory, so it's just there. So thanks, who, I don't know. And I just save the files as. So I'm too lazy, and I don't trust the notes function in glyphs. Even it's fantastic and everything. I'm just too lazy, and I don't want to deal with this. And this is another level of the application. I just think there's enough I want to do. So I just save as, and I put it on several hard drives to not lose it. And then I've got several to-do lists with several numbers and stuff all around my desk. And I think after 3 weeks, I just think, what is this? And I just throw it away. So this is how I'm working.
Yeah, usually it's like the more you're in a learning curve, the more it's interesting to keep the tracks of this thing. And actually, if I remember my typeface when I was studying in Reading, I would have the name of my typeface, V, I think it got to 500 something, or because it kept on evolving all the time. And then as I went along, I would still kind of keep this habit to keep different versions. And then more and more, like as you say, in the end, you realize you never actually go back to these older versions. It's quite interesting as a sort of archive. But
I still would like to have it automatically because, well, we are teachers. And I often sit in a situation when I think, oh yeah, if I would document this would be great educational material. Maybe tomorrow. And so it never happens.
Screenshots.
No, but there are tools already.
Just do screenshots and collect them.
The tools already exist. Like there are many versioning. Like if you work with Git or with a different kind of SVN system, you just you can go back to different versions of your file. Quite easily.
I just open the old one and copy paste the thing out.
Okay, can I ask? Yeah, you have people with questions here. Let's see. Gert, then Veronica.
So, I really like the discussion, but I would like to bring in a further component, and it's interesting. So the question of ownership you mentioned. This is, and you can think about this from a legal perspective. So how can you prove that you really, I think Fred, you said this, that you did the typeface, yeah? And because with the new digital workflows, it might be possible, and Malou, you said this, with coding modern software repository systems, it's possible. This is one part of the matter, but the other one is, from my perspective, if you think about marketing your typeface, I ask the question very often, the type designer, okay, could you give me some sketches? Yeah, in former times it was simple. There were paper-based sketches, and it was automatically something like a good base for promotional material, whatever. Yeah. So, and now you get normally the answer, no. all in a digital workflow. So it's very difficult to have something like a possibility to show the development of a typeface. Yeah. It's more or less you have 0 and 1.
I think this is vanity, because you actually could do this, but since a digital sketch in the application already looks like a finished crappy typeface, no one shows it.
Exactly.
This is, I think, and you just need to be brave enough to say, yeah, I know the result is fantastic, and the steps in between are total crap. And people know that I'm normally not doing this crap, and then you can show it. But I think people are too vain to really admit that they did silly things in between.
Mm-hmm. Could be, yeah. But he asked for sketches, analog stuff,
or even the sketches nowadays. Like if I will sketch, I do sketch sometimes with really tiny little sketch just to figure out like the very general structure of a letter, and then once I sort of clicks, I have a good idea in my mind of what I want to achieve, and then I can just go straight. But it's not like some of the really beautiful sketches that you can see from the DOS.
Nobody makes any real...
I do.
You do?
Yeah.
So you can show sketches, and you can show a development in Sketch.
Yeah, it's always great for publication.
Well, I think we've also all done sketches afterwards when you need to
exactly. This is
sketches like, afterwards.
Or nobody in this room.
Some 4-year-old sketches.
I just had a comment about let's say the log file. If you work in a team, and especially if you work with different scripts, it's extremely important to document. And also because you never work on just one project. We work on, I don't know, 3, 4, or whatever different projects, so that means that with time, there's perhaps a month wait for some feedback from the client, or you have to go back. And I don't remember what exactly I did, I don't know, 3 months ago on this A. Sorry, no. So we try to really keep very clear notes on who did what change on what file, and perhaps even some instructions to go to the next person who has to deal with it. So we found, at least starting to work in a bigger project, it's super important. I'm not sure it would be useful to have that in glyphs. Actually, I'm pretty certain it wouldn't. to have it more as an external accessible file. But yeah, it was just a comment
how do you do this? I mean, are you sitting down, everything you do you note, or do you at the end of the day everybody sits down for half an hour? How do you practically do this?
After I finished with the file for the day, yes, I do write
and you
pretty
have to
much down.
discipline yourself not to go to the beach, just sit there.
Well, it doesn't take like 5 hours.
It sounds like Git would be a good option also, because you can quite easily automate these things and see exactly this glyph has been added by this user, and like I think now the workflows are pretty good at this with collaborative projects.
Yeah.
Okay, which would tell you what happened, but not necessarily why it happened.
Yeah, but it's not always, like if you really need to explain why for each glyph, it's going to take as much time as designing it, I think. But
this is investigation then.
That's because Vic works in a very geographically dispersed environment, and those of you who are at the top will see things on the map, and I think a number of you work in very geographically dispersed environments where there's also delays. But also the demographics of the type design profession, let's say people who will claim they pay their income, they get their income from type design, is actually quite skewed. There's a minority of older people, mostly guys, yeah?
You don't need to do this.
No, because I know you're going to roast me if I do. But then if you drop below a certain age, certainly below my age, actually the demographic pyramid flattens out. And then you see a good thing and a problem. The good thing is that you see actually a very diverse community. The problem is that all of these people are moving through life at the same pace, which means life changes. So if you're a proprietor of a company that employs 5, 6, 7, 8, 50 typeface designers, a big part of them are likely to hit a point in their life when they want to move at the same time. Yeah? So there is actually, as a community, we have quite a lot of churn in relation to other industries. Yeah? That means then that if you've invested time in training people and sort of educating them and building the processes, and you don't have a good documentation method, you're actually losing quite a lot of expertise down the drain the moment they move and go to another country. And if you're lucky, they change careers. If you're not, they become your competitors.
Or you know, that the person is on holiday, or I don't know, or they are ill or whatever. So it is, I totally agree. For the workflow, it's super important.
So maybe this is actually quite a critical requirement. Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that I think the type designers sometimes consider ourselves as an artist, and we are thinking about outlines. And actually what we are delivering is pieces of software. And there are many ways today how developers keep track of software. So we can use a lot of these tools, like a versioning system, for example, which helps you to keep track of every simple thing you do in a font. And you can also go back to any moment in the process of the project and actually make a printing of what you did at that moment. So I think the archiving thing is already there, but we are still working sometimes like 20 years ago, like photographer style, like working in our homes, like as type designers, and we are not working together with the engineering parts, with the hinted parts, with all the situations that make a type, a font today, and a software.
Yeah, I think there are two things. There's like the documenting the process and the sort of development of a project and what has been added by who. And then there's the sort of documenting the design intentions, but I think this is much more tricky. And personally, I believe it is more like good designers should be able to have a sort of intuitive grasp of you look at a new design and you get familiar with it, and then you can work with it in a way. So, but I think these are two different things.
What do you think about the idea to put collaboration into variable font axis. An example, to have 3 designers with 3 versions of font, and you can just dial 50% of, I don't know, Verena, 30% of Malou.
I think it's important to fix it first.
What?
You just have to write it down first, and then I think you just have to fix how you're going to sort it out. Mm-hmm. And then there are solutions.
Also, all those save as versions that you mentioned could be maybe put into history axis. What do you think about that? To put all that versions in one axis?
Go back to CRUD version.
Yeah, for the purpose of education or trivia purpose.
Yeah.
You know,
making it compatible might be a bit tricky, but yeah, why not? It's an interesting concept.
Okay, thanks.
So there's a set of skills maybe missing from what we think of as designers' education, where there might be a tension between people coming from an art or creative. I've used the word creative in a derogatory term now, as in doesn't engage with process or is not rigorous. I think the way people who don't consider themselves creative would think of it. Yeah? So maybe introduce some process or rigor in thinking and habits for documentation or a methodology for it into people who are making the decisions as an essential part of the training of a designer.
They would hate it. They would never do it. I think it's important to really do this, but I mean, we know that when we try to convince the students to at least take backups, I mean, this is where it stops already. It's like, oh, it crashed, I can't present, sorry. So.
And would it be sort of the logical next step in font-making applications to think more so deeply about how to capture some of these decisions and intelligence, especially as the projects get quite complex? Maybe the documentation of the project could be something more deeply built into the application.
It's there already. It's existing already.
But you just said you don't do the comments.
I just don't use it. It's just, I have to just discipline myself to use these things. They are all there. I just have to deal with them.
So it either has to be automatic, like Fred said?
Well, yeah, I was referring to if you want to track down the process, it would be best if that would be, for me, it would be most comfortable if that would happen automatically. What I just now do is make different versions. Yeah. If you have to, if indeed you work on rather bigger projects, then it's good to indeed document everything, what is done, when, why. But that also depends on how big a certain team is, how well do everybody know each other, how long are they cooperating with each other. That these are all things that play a role. If I don't know someone, I probably write a lot of emails. But I want to avoid that. I want to, half a word should be enough. So I work with people, usually, that I know pretty well, and they know me pretty well.
Can I move us on to the discussion we're having about capturing shapes, the limits of Bezier curves or different models of making shapes?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the discussion was around partly some research that I did last year, and the fact that I mean, I really love Bezier curves in many ways, but I think they're like a really great tool to execute an idea, but a really terrible one to sketch and to look for ideas. And again, back to some of the stuff that Ferdinand showed. I think we take it for granted now that we work with an outline, but again, like punch cutting, which is like almost 5 centuries, so there's quite a big chunk. I don't think I don't want to step on your territory, but it didn't rely on outlines at all. And again, I think the the idea of sculpting surfaces is quite an interesting one, and it's something that we've kind of completely lost now that we're really used to working with outlines.
Well, yeah, to avoid people to work too fast, too soon, students then I'm referring to, in outlines, which are basically pieces of they are transparent, they do not really represent a shape unless you make them black, is simply to force them to do exercises with actual matter. One is simply, we take a piece of black paper and we cut strokes, and you can have 3 widths, and from those strokes you build letters.
And this is the best. This is a great exercise.
And then you might even, we go a bit further. If you want something delicate, you can, but then you have to tear it. You cannot use scissors. No, you have to tear it. So, and then things are different. What also is maybe a case, but it doesn't at all apply to the professional side of things, because we cannot, in the real business it doesn't work that way, but I think also that working with outlines all day, it's technology, and the technology is very perfect, it's sublime nowadays. It's it's difficult to improve. I mean, maybe people can do improvement, but at the moment I do not know what that should be. But we are humans, and I'm far from perfect. But if I do something very perfect, it becomes also in a way human, not human. And there's another kind of satisfaction that you can have or enjoy when you make these shapes in another way. Like cutting in paper, like cutting with stencils, like with actually cutting off punches. There's another experience. And this other experience is quite different, because it's really something different. If I cut a letter out of wood, then I have to decide which knife or chisel I take. I have to see whether it's sharp enough, and then I have to execute the cut. And then here the wood is different than there in structure or in color. It's a complete other experience. Yeah. And of course, this experience has no commercial value in our today's world, but it does deliver a different experience, a different kind of fun, and it also delivers other shapes. Yeah. Or often it does, or it can. The shapes that do not 1, 2, 3 occur that easily with Vigés.
Well, I think it's hands-on is one thing, and to work with material, for sure, but I think a second problem, and this is not the Vigés, but this is working with an application, is the undo function, and it's this lost in shape, lost in space syndrome, I call it. I think it's the fact that you hardly see the whole letter, and you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in, and you have no connection to the actual letter, not to mention the word. And it is very tempting. I mean, I'm still working like this, and I still prefer to see the whole letter when I'm working. But I know that for students it's extremely difficult, because everything is with this and this and this. So you never have a defined space or room where you're working in. And the second is it's a never-ending sad story in the worst case, because you can do undo, 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 and you never make a decision. And this is where I just think you should maybe have an application, just as an idea, that blocks the undo. There is no undo, and that fixes the space. It just as a training thing. So please do it. I would really appreciate if we could have this for the students, because I also believe that they are trained in a completely different way than I am. So I gave in. I don't think anymore that you have to use a pencil, you are not a good designer when you can't draw, when you can't paint. I think it's more about this finding decisions, getting to the point, and finding an end.
There is, of course, some truth in if I give somebody total control and he or she doesn't know what to do with it, it's very easy for him or her to get lost in this. But on the other hand, you said at the beginning, we live now in this world and we do not know where it's going.
And this is why we need guides.
And then you said we have to train the students and we have to teach. And one way is to make blockades, to make hindrances that doesn't give them the freedom we have been wanting all these years. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Limitation is part of the design process, I think.
But I think also
limitation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I think another aspect which for me is very important, going back to like cutting paper. I think you mentioned cutting black paper actually, is the difference between working with again a contour, like drawing the outside of a shape, and working from a black surface and removing some of the black matter. And in French, there's you say épargne, so like basically everything on which you act is being removed, and only what you don't touch stays. And this is also a very interesting and completely different way of approaching shapes, and I think they also produce really different results, and it's something that we've completely lost with Bezier curves, but that obviously was the case with punches. And so last year I tried a bit working with lino cut, which is an interesting, very easy way to create shapes with this sort of épargne kind of technique. But I think this is also another interesting aspect, is whether you're acting on the black or the white shape.
And you can do the actual lino cut in your kitchen.
Yeah.
Without undo and not lost in space.
Okay, so you want a sort of a sculpting plugin for the application.
Sculpting
you want a dummies switch in the preferences that maybe limits the zoom scale or limits your grid in some way, so you can get the students to work more easily. We've got a question somewhere.
Yeah, I was wondering about archiving part because. Sorry?
Archiving?
Archiving, yeah. So the Mozilla had a really interesting case where they did their branding in the way that it was open to the public, each step and each process they released. I was wondering if something like this as an educational tool, basically, would be possible in the type community.
So back to the sort of version history and collaborative aspect. Potentially. I don't know.
Don't know.
Try it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Try it.
John has a question.
On the subject of shapes, it's the kind of thing you hear a lot, and I've certainly heard it a lot over the 2 decades, of people saying, oh, the white is as important as the black. And this is something that when we get type designers together and talking about their processes, you get this idea that, oh, the white is as important or sometimes more important than the black. And sometimes I ask them, so what does that imply about your working method? Like, how is that practically carried out, and what do you do that's different in the white or the black? How do you make them the same, equal importance? I was wondering if you have particular methods or processes, or if you disagree with the basic premise itself.
Well, we tend to put the letters black on white, which is then more important, white or black. I then I think they're equally important because the one does the other thing. But if we reverse letters, if we put white letters on a black background, theoretically things should be the same, and mathematically they are. But my experience is nevertheless different. And what that is, I don't know, because my logic says you shouldn't have this feeling. But it is. I mean, I don't know if anyone here agrees with me. If you work do your work and you compose a word and the letters are white on black, if you reverse it, it's different, slightly different. There's not a huge difference, but the feeling I have with it, the experience that I have with it, is slightly different. And what that is, I do not know.
But isn't this just? I mean, paper is white, and it used to be white, and I think it's just how we are used to see things. So
it wasn't so much white and black, but the positive, negative, the bigger the ground.
Yeah.
However you want to put it. We have this idea. We have this commonly expressed idea in type design that the white shapes of the counters are as important as the black shapes of the strokes, or so whether it's figure ground or positive, negative. But if you actually ask people, what does that mean in terms of how they work, how they create the shapes? I very seldom find people who are able to describe to me how that... And partly has to do with what Malou was saying about outlines, that we're actually making outlines and then they happen to be colored in a particular color. But in terms of the actual shape-making process, I wonder kind of are there things that designers do that you can put into words that take into account this idea that they're of equal value?
Well, yeah, like I was saying, in certain techniques you actually act on the white space, and if you look at the work of Rudolf Koch, for instance, he's cut punches himself, so you're cutting the counters and the white shape around. He's done a lot of amazing work on just cutting paper, and he would always start with black paper and just remove some of the black shape as well. He's carved wood, and so through all of his sort of career, you can see he's basically always worked from the outside of the letters in, and I think this really shows in the shapes, in the letter forms of his work. And
may I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
You didn't finish, but no, I think it's we are not talking, or when we are teaching, we are not teaching the single letter. We are teaching the word. We are teaching the text. We are teaching the pattern, and the pattern is on a white paper. And I made the experience in Katowice. It accidentally happened, but we had this great workshop, and I started the workshop with Martin Major together. And I was told, yeah, teach German script. And I just thought, what is German script? And then I just thought, yeah, it's Fraktur. Fraktur is German script. And then we had this idea to start with Fraktur and let the students work with a broad pen to start with Fraktur. And they immediately started to create patterns and not single letters. And it was, I never saw students being that fast in understanding the idea of black and white, because after we finished with the Fraktur, they changed over to Roman italic. And it was incredible to see the counters they created. And I think it's really, we shouldn't talk about just the counter or just the letter. So I think it's really like yeah, the Rudolf Koch idea about starting with a pattern and then getting down to the, narrowed down to the smallest module you have on a page and then going back to the largest. So I think this is how it works.
There are also instances where these rules of thumbs are not true anymore. For instance, if you work on a very black slab serif, then actually the white becomes more important than the black. The spacing logic doesn't work anymore. Mathematical distance units become more important than spaces, etc. So it's not. It's also depending on the situation.
John, can I ask you something? When you're talking about this balance between, and of course it's for everybody, you're working in an environment that defines an arbitrary unit of measurement in the space in which you're designing, and you're making black shapes, right? And the black shapes have visible units because you see things that have width. They have a stroke width, and they have the thickness of the thick stroke or the thickness of the thin stroke. So they're visible units that you can manipulate. But you don't have an equivalent to manipulate the white space. That is in this arbitrary 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 2048. Would it make, you think, do you think it would make it easier if you had a way to define units of white space that would relate to the black shapes that you're making? So you could tell, for example, your font making application, here's my unit of white space that has this sense of this proportion in relation to my strokes. And I want you to impose a grid on my background that is this multiple of my stroke thicknesses.
Well, we do a certain amount of that. Certainly, if you're making fonts targeting particular pixel sizes, for example, you start thinking in hinting terms. So even if you're not actually doing the hinting, you're thinking about black distances and white distances and sometimes gray distances. It's more about distance and shape, though. So it's useful to have tools. One of the things I really liked about Frederick's UFO stretch was the bar measurement tool that would show you both the black distances and the white distances, which when you're manipulating the widths of things, that's exactly the information you want. But it's distances rather than shape.
Or areas, or some unit that is relative to the bits that you're making, rather than some arbitrary unit of measurement.
Well, area is very interesting. And so in Sol's talk this morning, we were talking about the dealing with spacing with area. It was very interesting. And then also the talk that Bedard gave last year about coming up with mathematically fast ways of calculating area, which then can feed into all sorts of stuff around spacing and rendering and everything else. But I think designers have barely begun to think about ways to leverage that kind of stuff. Maybe we will.
I would like to come back to the question we started with, something with paper or not with paper, and archiving, having something to show. I was considering the question, might it be the time to reconsider or to differentiate between the more, it sounds a little bit weird, the more engineering-oriented design phase using our standard font tools, and besides that, so for sketches and beginning, having a different kind of tool with more flexibility and not what we all talked about with the limitation of Bezier curves, which is a little bit like with CAD and starting with PAN, from a technical drawing perspective. On the engineering side, it's the same problem, by the way. So from that perspective, is this something which is interesting from your perspective, that the font editors in the future might have a different kind of approach for the creative sketches phase?
Whoa.
I would love it. Wouldn't this be great to have something like Photoshop and then it just does it? I mean, and then it's like black ink and white paint, and I would love it, but I don't know if someone can please program this. Would be a nice idea, I think.
Wow. It's also depending on.
Yeah, but this is.
No, sorry.
Other tools, with bigger precision or more possibilities. It also depends how what we use now, font editors. And we refer to our digital tools as font editors. So there where we create our outlines and assign side bearings and kerning and place anchors and all that. In principle, a font editor could also be a general or a very professional drawing tool. They might develop in that direction. And because, you know, maybe, like, we don't know what's going to happen, but maybe in the future, font editors are just illustrators that also can produce fonts, or have an option where you can address Unicodes. And what this drawing program should do in this super duper virtual world, I do not know now, and I leave that up to the others, to the younger ones. But yeah, if type and virtual reality or our reality is so interlocked and intertwined, why is a font editor still a font editor?
I think the main problem is actually not to have a drawing tool or something. I mean, most of the people are doing logos already in font editors because it's much better. For me, it's much easier to work on this stuff. I think it's difficult to introduce the idea of that you've got cells, you've got a table of glyphs, and then you can edit this, and then you can type this and bring this into a combination and so on. So everything we are doing every day for other designers is magic, because they always live in this idea of a 2D space. And I mean, the font editor already is a 3D space in mind, how we are working. And if you could implement all these things, but then you've got the problem with pixels versus exporting. Yeah, but if someone can do this, I think it sounds really good.
I think sketching would be really interesting to add, but just something simple, which I think for most of us in the room seems normal, but that if you take two contours and they overlap slightly, then you'll have intersecting black and white. This seems normal for us, but in a sketching sort of logic, it's really not at all. And so also I did a project last year where I wanted to have one contour which would be just always white. And it's actually really challenging to do within a type design environment. So this shows also the limits of the logic that's behind the tools that we use, because they're there for producing. So produce a font. So perhaps, yeah, you'd have to have something perhaps within the same software, but that would be with different logics, I guess.
Okay, we've got two questions. I'm going to go two questions.
Just a comment.
Quickly.
I think it's great because we are discussing things that are not future-based in concern of variable fonts at all. I think we are talking about really the old stuff here, which is fun.
Okay, we've got two questions, and then we'll round up. Yves.
Yeah.
Not far.
When I was a student, I did an internship at a high-end software company where they had more than one type of curves within their software. So I remember there was, besides Bezier, also something like quadratic curves and like even two more. Do you believe when you're designing in Bezier that the nature of the curves somehow limits what you can do with the forms, and would you welcome a more diverse set of curve kinds or something like that to?
Yes and no. In principle, it's true that you cannot always create the shape you want with Beziers. And then you have to escape to methods by adding extra points and this and that. And then it somehow works. But it's not what you want to do, because you want to make from that point to that point, preferably when it's something curved, smoothly curved, then you want to have only 2 points. But sometimes the curve doesn't come out and you have to do other things. I think this is just a simple sample. There are more. But there are indeed sometimes, there are occasions where it doesn't really work out that smooth. Yeah.
Yeah, personally, actually, I think it would be interesting to challenge a bit Bezier curves, and sorry for actually speaking about variable fonts, but I remember like seeing even like underwear's experiment with the mega font and things like that. So you can, they added lots of points everywhere to make everything compatible. And then I remember David Brezina last year showing some research with people actually interpolating bitmap images. And in a way, it made me wonder if perhaps not the actual variable fonts, but variability was still would not develop fully until we would not go to another way of describing curves. I don't know, it might be just a sort of stupid idea, but I think there's interesting.
Paul?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really, I think the biggest problem maybe here or at least looking at the software that we use nowadays, I think the biggest problem that we have is basically that the software that we use that is available to us, and those are really like a limited amount of tools, are, in my opinion, is production software. We are not using design software. So for someone who enters this field, they got actually their introduction into making this stuff in software that is production-based, which is really not the ideal way of how you should actually learn it. So the one thing that actually we need to do as teachers is to show our students the way how to draw in the first place in the most comfortable way possible. And that might be very individually. So whether that is just pen on paper, or whether that is with an iPad, the pen tools with an iPad, or just using only corner points very quickly, or any kind of thing, I think it doesn't really matter that we need to show like this is the way. It's more about introducing people to multiple kinds of way of how you can actually just first try to get your ideas from your head onto something that you can see and you can judge. And I think that is not, like I said, not something you can just solve by just having one tool or one thing, but it's about showing your students the way of how it can be done. And people need to individually find their way of how they can really design in the most efficient way, and especially just visualize what they want to do and judge it.
I think we all agree on this.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, but I agree with you. But like you said, we don't know where the thing is going to, and you talk about special or different ways, a more advanced way of drawing, sketching, digitally even. Yet we have schools where our children don't learn to write. So should we draw?
Well, I mean that's not our. That's not of course, we can have our opinion about that and choose where to send our children to. But
who guarantees me that the concept of drawing is going to be there forever? I mean, if you look what happens in the general world of the language of the line, which doesn't mean very much to you maybe, but this is dying.
I disagree.
It's a very elite thinking, I think, because not everybody can afford these schools and everything. And to be honest, I think that several font applications are not that limited, I think, and they are very design-based, I think.
Drawing in Base.js is not really, I think, very design-based.
Martin has a point?
I'm basically also agreeing with you. I think that the drawing is the design.
Yeah, I agree.
And the working with Bezier curves is the definition of that, or the description of the design, and that is I think what it's all about. And how do you find your way, as Paul said, to create that design or design something versus turning that design into a description.
Yeah, but no one is doubting this.
Curve.
I think we are all in the same boat.
I would just like to question the whole term of a design software. Am I thinking there's no such thing as a design software? The design process happens in your mind. And then there are tools to produce what you would like to have or what you would like to see.
You are the text woman, you can change the terms.
I would like to, because otherwise we would have to call a pencil a design tool too. Yeah, but then there's no such thing as a software adding to design or helping to design. It's just a better tool or an easier tool to design. Okay.
I don't agree that the design can exist in your head. It only I mean, you can start. It starts there, but it only becomes a design once you can see it. Whether that's on paper or digital doesn't really matter all that much. But it has to become visible.
What I mean is that the term.
We can go
what
now.
I mean is that the term design software might give people the impression that they could design with that tool, with using that tool only, and this is what, for me, makes it kind of difficult.
Okay, Marina is giving me the look.
What?
Do you have a camera? I would love to take it.
I'll try to summarize this, but I think it's quite pertinent. So, I think Fred is saying that young people are broken by the time they gain the desire to become type designers. They might not know how to hold a pencil or sketch. They might not have these form-making skills. Yeah? Paul says it's an essential thing to find out useful, appropriate, expressive ways of making forms, of capturing their intentions in whichever way suits each person, and that's an essential starting point for the design process. Am I capturing correctly? Yeah, those tools can still be digital. In a sense, we could be agnostic completely about how people do it, and we might put labels on them or not. I don't know, I'm trying to keep Sonia from... but that might also mean, this segment, that the boundaries of where the design starts and stops and something that is the making or the fixing of the form are quite fluid, and they might depend on the process that each person chooses to follow. I'm sort of weaseling out of this one. Yeah. But I think if I'm trying to summarize discussion, that there's interesting issues about process and about the thinking that goes into it and how we interact with tools that are changing all the time, and they're also the products of different communities and people with different perspectives onto things. And if there's probably one thing that is certain, is that the idea of, as you termed it, the narcissistic designer is probably coming to an end.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah?
It's very comfy and I liked it, but I think it's a nice chance for the community now.
That some form of communication and engagement with groups and community is an integral part of the designer's job specification. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And that means some training in language and also empathy towards others and understanding for how to communicate with people with different backgrounds. And that would be a very good starting point for any education in design. Yeah? Yep. That's good.
Not just in design, any kind of education.
Yeah. Correct. Okay, good. Please, round of applause for our panelists in the discussion. And for Ferdinand, who got the ball rolling. Thank you very much. Okay, and we're